Chapter 1. The weeping air, the candlelight trembled against the vaulted ceiling of Thornvale Manor, casting shadows that moved like living things across the stone walls. Eleanor Ashford kept her eyes fixed on the silverware she was polishing, her hand steady despite the cold that seemed to seep from the very bones of the ancient house. She had learned in her 3 weeks of service here that stillness was survival. That silence was a kind of armor. The other servants whispered that Lord Caspian Nightshade never dined with his household, that he kept to the highest tower, emerging only when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky, that his son, the boy she glimpsed only once, pale as winter frost, was touched by the same darkness that had claimed the noble houses since the Treaty of Ashen Dawn. Eleanor didn't believe in darkness. She believed in work, in coin, in keeping her head down in her past buried 6 counties. Away where scandal couldn't follow. The dinner bell rang through the corridors like a funeral knell. Mrs. Blackwood, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her severe face drawn tight with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps. Or resignation. "Girl," she said, her voice clipped. "You're to serve the upper dining hall tonight." Eleanor's hands stilled on the silver fork. "But I'm not trained for..." "The others refuse." Mrs. Blackwood's jaw worked. "Lord Nightshade has requested a meal with his son. It's unprecedented. You'll go, or you'll leave Thornvale tonight with no reference and no wages owed." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Eleanor had fled London, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter knowledge that her former employer's son had tried to claim what she wouldn't give, then painted her as the seducer when she fought back. No family would take her. No respectable house would hear her name without sneering. Thornvale Manor, perched on the edge of the Blackwood Forest in a county so remote even the scandal sheets didn't reach, had been her last hope. "I'll go," Eleanor whispered. Mrs. Blackwood's expression softened for just a moment. Flicker of something that might have been sympathy. "Keep your eyes down. Speak only when spoken to. And whatever you see..." She paused, her weathered hand gripping Eleanor's arm with surprising strength. "Forget it before morning." The upper dining hall was a cathedral of shadows and flame. A table stretched the length of the room, dark wood gleaming like obsidian, beneath a chandelier hung with hundreds of candles that burned without flickering, as if the air itself was too afraid to move. Tapestries lined the walls, scenes of battles fought beneath blood-red moons, of figures with eyes that seemed to glow even in thread and dye. At the head of the table sat Lord Caspian Nightshade. Eleanor had expected a monster from the servants' whispered tales. What she saw instead stole the breath from her lungs. He was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, sharp and merciless and impossibly elegant. His hair fell black as midnight over shoulders, clad in a coat that might have been fashionable a century ago, all dark velvet and silver clasps. His skin held the pallor of fine marble. And his eyes ... His eyes were the color of storm clouds at twilight, neither quite gray nor quite violet. And they fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "You're the new girl?" he said. His voice was quiet, cultured, with an accent she couldn't place. It made her think of old books and older graves. "Eleanor Ashford, my lord." She curtsied as she'd been taught in her previous life, before everything had burned down around her. "I'm here to serve." Something flickered across his perfect features. "To serve," he repeated, as if tasting the words. "How ... mortal." Before she could parse that strange response, a sound shattered the heavy silence. A child's sob. Eleanor's head turned toward the far end of the table, where a boy of perhaps 7 or 8 years sat in a chair too large for his small frame. He was exquisite in the way his father was unnaturally beautiful, with the same midnight hair and marble skin. But where Lord Nightshade's face was a mask of careful control, the child's was crumpled with unmistakable anguish. Tears streamed down his cheeks, luminous and strange in the candlelight. His small hands gripped the edge of the table, and his shoulders shook with the effort of containing sobs that clearly wanted to break free. Lord Nightshade didn't look at his son. "Lucian," he said softly, dangerously. "Compose yourself." The boy tried. Eleanor watched him struggle to swallow his tears, to still his trembling hands. He was trying so desperately to be what his father demanded, stone, ice. Something unfeeling, and failing with every shuddering breath. Something in Eleanor's chest, cracked open. She'd been warned to stay silent. To keep her place. But she'd spent the last 3 months learning what it felt like to cry alone. To have no one see your pain and fewer still care about it. He just needs a mother. Eleanor heard herself say. The words fell into the room, like stones into still water. Lord Nightshade's head turned toward her with a slowness that felt predatory. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Of power so old and terrible it didn't need to shout. What did you say? Eleanor's survival instinct screamed at her to apologize, to drop her eyes, to remember her place. But she looked at that small, weeping boy, at a child trying so hard not to need comfort, and something stubborn rose in her throat. I said he needs a mother, my lord. She kept her voice steady. He's frightened and alone at that end of the table. He's a child and children need. I know what children need, Lord Nightshade interrupted, rising from his chair with inhuman grace. He moved like shadow, like something that had forgotten it, had ever been bound by mortal limitations. I know precisely what my son requires. And it is not sentiment. It is not weakness. Lucian's sobs cut off abruptly. The boy looked at his father with eyes too old for his young face, eyes that held something Eleanor recognized with painful clarity. The desperate hope that this time, someone might see him. Lord Nightshade crossed the distance between them. And Eleanor realized with crystalline certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. This close, she could see that his eyes weren't gray or violet at all. They held depths of color that shifted and changed like oil on water. That his skin, though pale, held no imperfection. No pore, no flaw. Nothing human. You presume much for a servant girl fleeing scandal, he said quietly. Eleanor's heart stopped. How did you? I know everything that enters my domain. His gaze pinned her like a butterfly to card. Every secret. Every fear. Every wound carried across the threshold of Thornvale Manor. He leaned closer. And she smelled something strange and intoxicating, old wine and older earth. Myrrh and midnight. You think my son needs gentleness, Lord Nightshade murmured. But gentleness is what kills our kind. Softness is a death sentence in a world of houses that would see us broken and scattered. I am teaching him to survive. From the end of the table came a small, broken sound. Eleanor looked past Lord Nightshade's imposing form to where Lucian sat with fresh tears streaming down his face, silent now. Perfectly controlled and utterly devastated. You're teaching him to be alone, Eleanor whispered. For a long moment, Lord Nightshade said nothing. Then he smiled, and it was terrible, beautiful, and cold as death itself. You will come to the tower at midnight, he said. And we will discuss exactly what you think you understand about my son's needs. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. And Eleanor, standing in that hall of shadows and secrets with her heart hammering against her ribs, knew that her quiet life of hiding was over. The vampire had seen her. And nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2. The midnight threshold. Eleanor stood before the tower door at precisely midnight, her single candle guttering in a draught that seemed to whisper through the stone itself. She'd changed from her servant's dress into the only other garment she owned, a simple gray gown that had once been fine enough for a governess but now bore the wear of too many desperate days. Her hands trembled. She pressed them flat against her skirts. She should run. Every instinct screamed it. Mrs. Blackwood had found her in the servants' quarters an hour ago, her face pale as parchment. Whatever he asks of you, the housekeeper had whispered. Remember that refusal is a luxury the desperate cannot afford. The words had sounded like warning and benediction both. Eleanor raised her hand to knock. But the door swung open before her knuckles touched wood. Lord Nightshade stood silhouetted against a room lit by what seemed like 100 candles. He'd shed his formal coat, and in shirt sleeves and vest he looked almost human. Almost. Until one noticed how still he stood, no rise and fall of breath, no unconscious shift of weight. He occupied space the way statues did, with an immobility that made her skin prickle. "You came," he said, and she couldn't tell if he was surprised or satisfied. "You commanded it, my lord." "Did I?" His head tilted with that predatory curiosity. "I recall extending an invitation." "You could have refused, could I?" Eleanor met his gaze, emboldened by exhaustion and the reckless courage of someone who'd already lost everything once. Or would refusal have seen me cast out with no wages, no reference, and winter coming on hard? Something flickered in those impossible eyes. "You have a sharper tongue than your downcast demeanor suggests, Miss Ashford. I've learned when to use it, my lord. Have you?" He stepped aside, gesturing her into the tower room. "Then perhaps you're more than the trembling creature I scented in the dining hall." Eleanor crossed the threshold, and the door closed behind her with a sound like a crypt ceiling. The tower was nothing like she'd imagined. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, ancient tomes bound in leather and metal, newer volumes with gilt lettering, manuscripts that looked as though they might crumble out of breath. A desk sat before the window, covered in correspondence written in languages she didn't recognize. And in the corner, partially hidden by a silk screen, was a bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. "You expected dungeons and chains, I suppose," Lord Nightshade said from behind her. Too close behind her. Blood-stained altars and instruments of torture. Eleanor turned, forcing herself not to retreat. "I expected a father who wanted to discuss his son." The change in his expression was minute but unmistakable. The mask cracked just for a heartbeat, and she saw something underneath, something raw and aching. "Lucian," he said quietly, moving past her to stand before the window. Beyond the glass, the blackwood forest stretched like a dark sea beneath the moon. "My son. My heir. My greatest achievement and my deepest failure." Eleanor waited. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "He was born 8 years ago," Lord Nightshade continued, his voice low and measured, as if each word cost him something. "His mother was human, mortal. She knew what I was, what we are, and she chose me anyway. Foolish, perhaps, but brave." "What happened to her?" Eleanor asked softly. "Childbirth." The words were flat, final. "The transition from human to our kind is difficult. Some survive it. Some embrace it. And some..." He paused. "Some cannot bear what they become and choose the sun before their first decade ends." Eleanor's breath caught. She killed herself? She chose freedom over eternity. His hand pressed against the window glass, pale fingers splayed wide. "She left me, Lucian, half mortal, half immortal, belonging fully to neither world. A child who ages slower than humans but faster than our kind. Who needs food and drink but can survive on blood alone. Who cries mortal tears, and yet will outlive empires." The anguish in his voice was so carefully contained it almost sounded like indifference. Almost. "He mourns her still," Lord Nightshade said. "Every meal we share at that damnable table, he mourns her. He sits where she used to sit and tries so desperately to remember what it felt like to have her hold him. And I..." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I cannot give him what he needs. Comfort is not in my nature. Softness was trained out of me 3 centuries ago when my own house tried to break me into compliance." Eleanor took a step closer. "Then why did you summon me?" He turned to face her, and the moonlight painted his features in shades of silver and shadow. "Because you looked at my son and saw a child. Not an heir. Not a political liability. Not the half-breed offspring of a scandal that still echoes through the courts. You saw a boy who needed comfort, and you dared speak it aloud in my presence. That offended you. It terrified me." The admission hung in the air between them. Stark and honest. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her throat. "Why?" Lord Nightshade closed the distance between them with 3 measured steps. He moved with that unnatural grace, and suddenly he was close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, marks of age that existed despite his immortal nature. As if grief itself had carved them there. "Because I've spent 8 years teaching my son to be strong," he said quietly. Teaching him to survive in a world where the five houses would see him dead or controlled. Where his mixed blood makes him a target for those who believe purity is power. I've taught him to hide his tears, to master his hunger, to show nothing that could be exploited. You've taught him to be alone, Eleanor repeated her earlier words. I've taught him to survive. The flash of intensity was sudden, burning. Then it banked, controlled. But tonight, watching him weep ... Watching him try so desperately to please me by becoming stone ... Lord Nightshade's jaw worked. I saw his mother in him. I saw the part of him that is mortal, unbreakable, and so damned fragile. And you're afraid you're killing it, Eleanor said softly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Eleanor found herself speaking before caution could stop her. What do you want from me, my lord? Lord Nightshade studied her for a long moment. You fled scandal, yes? A nobleman's son who thought you owed him what you wouldn't freely give? Her spine stiffened. How do you— I told you. I know everything that enters Thornvale. His gaze held hers. You understand what it means to be alone. To be seen as something to be used rather than someone to be known. You've worn armor too, Miss Ashford. Perhaps of a different kind than mine, but armor nonetheless. That doesn't answer my question. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He turned away, moving back to the window. I want you to teach my son what I cannot. How to feel without breaking. How to need without weakness. How to be human enough to survive the parts of him that are mortal. Eleanor's breath caught. You want me to mother him. I want you to help him remember he's allowed to be a child. Lord Nightshade's reflection in the glass was ghostly, insubstantial. Before the court's demand he becomes something else entirely. And if I refuse? Then you'll have your wages, a glowing reference and safe passage wherever you wish to go. He met her eyes in the reflection. I am many things, Miss Ashford, but I don't force bonds that should be freely given. That's what separates us from the monsters we could become. Eleanor thought of Lucien's tear-streaked face. Of the desperate way he'd tried to swallow his sobs. Of how achingly familiar that performance of strength had been. If I agree, she said slowly, I have conditions. Lord Nightshade turned, one eyebrow raised. You bargain with me? You said bonds should be freely given. That requires negotiation. Does it not? For the first time since she'd entered the tower, he smiled, truly smiled, with something that might have been approval. Name your terms, brave girl. I'm not a servant if I do this. I'm a governess with appropriate quarters and respect from the household staff. Lucien comes to lessons willingly, not by command. And she swallowed hard. You tell me the truth about what you are. What he is. What I'm walking into. The truth, Lord Nightshade repeated softly. The truth is dangerous, Miss Ashford. More dangerous than ignorance? He considered her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand, pale, elegant, unmarked by time or labor. We have an accord. I'll answer your questions about our kind. You'll help my son remember how to be human. Eleanor looked at his offered hand. This was the moment. The choice that would bind her to the strange, dark household and whatever secrets it held. She thought of London. Of having nowhere left to run. She thought of Lucien's face. She placed her hand in his. His skin was cool. Smooth, and the moment their palms touched, she felt something, a current, a recognition. Something that sang in her blood like a half-remembered song. Lord Nightshade's eyes widened, just slightly. Interesting, he murmured. What? Nothing. He released her hand, but his gaze remained fixed on her face with new intensity. Welcome to Thornvale Manor, Miss Ashford. May you not come to regret it. Eleanor left the tower as the first light of pre-dawn touched the sky. Her mind whirling with impossible things. Behind her, Lord Caspian Nightshade stood at his window and watched her cross the courtyard below. His hand still tingled, where she touched him. And for the first time in a century, he wondered if he'd just made a terrible mistake or invited salvation through his door. Chapter 3. Lessons in Twilight. Eleanor's new quarters occupied the East Wing's third floor, A suite of rooms that must have belonged to someone of importance once. The bedroom held a four-poster bed with curtains of faded burgundy velvet, a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light, and windows that overlooked the rose garden where thorned vines had long ago claimed dominion over careful cultivation. Mrs. Blackwood had delivered the news of Eleanor's elevation with tight-lipped disapproval and a warning. The last governess lasted 3 weeks before she fled screaming in the night. The one before that simply vanished. Lord Nightshade's household is not kind to those who get too close. Eleanor had thanked her and unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them in drawers that could have held 10 times what she owned. Now, 3 days later, she stood in the morning room that had been designated as the schoolroom, watching dust motes dance in the thin sunlight that managed to penetrate Thornvale's perpetual gloom. The room felt unused, unloved, shelves empty of books, walls bare of maps or charts. A single desk and chair positioned with mathematical precision in the center. She'd requested supplies. They'd arrived that morning in crates, primers and poetry, mathematics texts and mythology, art supplies and musical scores. She'd spent the dawn hours transforming the sterile space into something that felt alive. Now she simply had to wait for her student. The clock struck 10. Then 11. Noon came and went. Lucian didn't appear. Eleanor found him in the conservatory at 1:30, curled in a window seat overlooking the forest. He wore a black suit that made him look like a miniature version of his father, formal, contained, untouchable. But his feet were bare, and there was dirt under his fingernails. And when he turned at her approach, his eyes were red-rimmed. "You've been crying," Eleanor said softly. Lucian's face closed like a door slamming shut. "I have not. House Nightshade does not weep. But Lucian does." The boy's careful mask cracked. His chin trembled before he caught it, forcing his features back into that terrible composure. "Father says you're to teach me." "I don't need teaching. I already know Latin and Greek. I can recite the lineages of all 5 houses back 7 centuries. I understand blood mathematics and territorial law." Eleanor settled onto the window seat across from him, careful to leave space between them. "That's very impressive. Your father must be proud." "Father is never proud." The words were matter-of-fact, devastating. Pride is a vulnerability. Satisfaction is weakness. "He teaches me to be stone. And what do you want to be?" Lucian stared at her with those 2 old eyes. "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." The boy's breath hitched. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might cry again. Instead, he straightened his spine and lifted his chin in unconscious mimicry of his father's proud bearing. "I'm supposed to be in the schoolroom. Father said I must obey you." "Your father said you'd come to lessons willingly, not by command." Eleanor kept her voice gentle. "So I'm asking, do you want to come?" Lucian's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "You're the governess. You tell me what to do. I'm asking what you'd like to learn." "I already told you what I know, not what you know. What you'd like to learn. What makes you curious? What makes you feel alive?" The word alive seemed to strike something in him. His gaze drifted to the window, to the forest beyond. "The trees," he whispered. "I want to know about the trees. Why they change colors. Where the birds go in winter. How the roots talk to each other underground." Eleanor smiled. "Then that's where we'll start." They spent the afternoon in the forest. Lucian transformed the moment they crossed beneath the canopy, the rigid little lord dissolving into a child who ran between the trees with his arms outstretched, who pressed his pale hands against bark and laughed when beetles scurried over his fingers. Eleanor followed, answering his breathless questions about photosynthesis and mycelial networks, about migration patterns and seasonal cycles. "Mother used to bring me here," Lucian said suddenly, stopping beside an ancient oak. His hand rested against the trunk with something like reverence. Before she chose the sun." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Your father told me." "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry." Lucian's voice was small. "But sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't make father look at me without seeing her." Sorry doesn't make me less double quotes, he trailed off. Less what? Wrong. The word was barely audible. Half thing. Not human enough for the mortal world. Not immortal enough for the courts. House Ravencross calls me the mongrel. House Silvermere won't acknowledge I exist. Even our own house father's cousins, they whisper that I'm a mistake that should have been corrected. Eleanor knelt beside him, bringing herself to his eye level. Lucian, look at me. He did, reluctantly. You are not a mistake. You are not wrong. You are yourself, unique and valuable, and exactly as you should be. You don't know what it's like, he whispered. To not belong anywhere. To have everyone look at you and see something broken, don't I? Eleanor heard the bitterness in her own voice, and couldn't quite suppress it. I was a governess in a fine London house. The family son decided I was his to take. When I fought him off, they called me a seductress. A liar. A moral stain on their household. I lost my position, my reputation, my entire future, because I wasn't what they wanted me to be. Lucian's eyes widened. They hurt you. They tried to. But I refused to break. Eleanor reached out slowly, giving him time to retreat. When he didn't, she brushed a leaf from his dark hair. We're alike. You and I, we've both been told we're wrong for not fitting into boxes others built for us. What did you do? His voice was hungry for answers. How did you survive? I ran. I hid. I found a place where maybe, just maybe, I could start again. Eleanor smiled softly. I found Thornvale. I found you. Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it. I'm glad you're here. Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest, something dangerous and tender that felt remarkably like purpose. They returned to the manor as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Lucian chattered about everything they'd seen, his earlier melancholy replaced by genuine animation. Eleanor listened, answered questions, and tried not to notice how the boy's hand had slipped into hers, somewhere along the path. Lord Nightshade stood in the courtyard, watching their approach. He'd changed into evening attire, dark coat, silver-threaded vest, boots that gleamed like obsidian. In the dying light, he looked like something out of a painting. Beautiful, remote, untouchable. But his gaze was fixed on their joined hands with an intensity that made Eleanor's pulse stutter. Father! Lucian dropped her hand and ran forward, then caught himself remembering, perhaps, that House Nightshade did not run, did not show enthusiasm, did not behave like mortal children. He slowed to a walk, his excitement visibly dampening. Eleanor's heart ached to see it. We studied botany, Lucian reported, his voice carefully controlled. Miss Ashford explained symbiosis and mycorrhizal networks. I believe I understand the principles of... You have dirt on your face, Lord Nightshade interrupted. Lucian froze. His hand flew to his cheek, mortification flooding his features. I apologize, Father. I'll leave it. Lord Nightshade's voice was soft. It suits you. Lucian stared at his father as if he'd sprouted wings. Lord Nightshade's gaze shifted to Eleanor, and something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps. Or gratitude. Miss Ashford. A word, if you please. Lucian, go prepare for dinner. The boy hesitated, looking between them. Then he nodded and disappeared into the manor, casting one last glance over his shoulder. When they were alone, Lord Nightshade moved closer. The last light caught in his eyes, turning them the color of storm clouds shot through with lightning. You took him into the forest. Is that forbidden? It's dangerous. The boundaries between our lands and House Ravencross run through those woods. There are things that hunt there, things that would see Lucian as a prize worth claiming. Eleanor lifted her chin. Then perhaps you should have mentioned that before agreeing to let me teach him. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. You don't frighten easily, do you, Miss Ashford? I've learned that most monsters wear human faces, my lord. The ones in the forest seem honest by comparison. Honest, he repeated, taking another step closer. Is that what you think we are? Eleanor's breath caught. He was close enough now that she could see the fine embroidery on his vest, smell that strange scent of old wine and earth. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "that you love your son more than you know how to show. I think you're terrified of failing him the way you believe you failed his mother. And I think you brought me here because you hope I can teach him something you've forgotten. And what's that?" "How to be happy." Lord Nightshade stared at her for a long, breathless moment. Then he reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and brushed a smudge of dirt from her temple. His fingers were cool against her skin, gentle in a way that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "You're dangerous," he murmured. "Because I care about your son? Because you make me remember what it felt like to hope." He withdrew his hand and stepped back, the mask of control sliding into place. "Dinner is at 8. You'll join us." "That's not a request, Miss Ashford, it's a necessity. Lucian needs to see that not all meals are battlegrounds." Then he was gone. Moving with that inhuman speed that left her dizzy, Eleanor stood alone in the darkening courtyard. Her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. Dangerous. He'd called her. But as the first stars emerged overhead and Thornville's windows blazed with light, Eleanor wondered which of them was truly in peril, and whether danger always felt this much like coming home. Chapter 4. The Unveiled Truth Dinner. That evening was a different affair entirely. Lucian arrived scrubbed clean but with his hair still slightly damp, curling at the edges in a way that made him look younger, softer. He'd changed into fresh clothes but chosen a simple shirt and trousers rather than the formal attire he'd worn earlier, a small rebellion that Lord Nightshade acknowledged with the barest nod of approval. Eleanor had been seated not at the servants' end of the table, but midway between father and son, close enough to Lucian to offer comfort, near enough to Lord Nightshade that conversation felt possible rather than shouted across an impossible distance. The food was simple. Roasted chicken, vegetables glazed with honey, bread still warm from the ovens. Mortal food prepared with care. Eleanor noticed that Lord Nightshade's plate remained empty save for a crystal goblet filled with dark wine that caught the candlelight like rubies. Not wine. She realized with a cold shock. Blood. He caught her staring and raised the goblet slightly in sardonic salute. "You wanted truth, Miss Ashford. This is part of it." Lucian pushed vegetables around his plate, his earlier animation fading into nervous silence. He kept glancing at his father, then at Eleanor, as if unsure what performance was required of him. "Tell me about the oak tree," Eleanor said gently. "The one you showed me. How old do you think it is?" The boy's face brightened. "Centuries, at least. You can tell by the girth and the pattern of the bark. Mother said some of the trees in Blackwood Forest were here before the houses came to these lands. Before the covenant was written." "The covenant?" Eleanor looked between them. Lord Nightshade set down his goblet. "The treaty that governs our kind. Written in 1347, signed in blood by the 5 houses after the Wars of Succession nearly destroyed us all. It established territories, feeding rights, the rules of turning mortals, and..." His gaze flickered to Lucian. "The laws regarding hybrid offspring." "Laws," Eleanor repeated carefully. "What kind of laws?" "The kind that say I shouldn't exist," Lucian said quietly. His fork clattered against his plate. "The kind that say children like me are abominations that weaken the bloodlines. That we should be." He stopped, his throat working. "That's enough, Lucian." Lord Nightshade's voice was soft but firm. "No." Eleanor surprised herself with the strength in her voice. "If I'm to help him, I need to understand." "All of it." Lord Nightshade studied her across the candlelight, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. A strangely human gesture from a creature who didn't need to breathe. "The covenant forbids unions between mortals and immortals specifically because of children like Lucian. Hybrids are unpredictable. They carry powers we don't fully understand, weaknesses we cannot anticipate. They blur the lines between our world and a human one. And that frightens the other houses," Eleanor said. "It terrifies them." Lord Nightshade's fingers traced the stem of his goblet. House Ravencross has been petitioning the courts for years to have all hybrid children eliminated. House Silvermere wants them exiled to neutral territories. House Thornwood proposes binding rituals that would suppress their immortal nature, leaving them functionally human. Eleanor felt sick. And House Nightshade? House Nightshade protects its own. The words carried absolute conviction. Lucian is my son, my heir, and I will burn any house to ash that threatens him. The vehemence in his voice startled her, and from the wide-eyed look on Lucian's face, it startled him too. You mean that? Lucian whispered. I would raise the world for you. Lord Nightshade's gaze softened infinitesimally. Never doubt that, Lucian. Whatever else you question about me, know that. The boy's eyes filled with tears that he blinked away furiously. Then why do you make me pretend to be stone? Why can't I just... Because the moment they see weakness in you, they'll exploit it. Lord Nightshade leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. The courts are gathering in 3 months for the Centennial Assembly. Every house will be there, evaluating threats, forming alliances, searching for advantages. You'll be presented as my heir, and they will test you. If they sense vulnerability, emotion, attachment, anything they can use, they will sink their claws in and never let go. Eleanor's mind raced. That's why you wanted me to teach him. Not just to help him be human, but to help him hide it. To help him survive it. Lord Nightshade's jaw tightened. I've spent 8 years trying to armor him through discipline and distance. But tonight, watching him come home covered in dirt and smiling, he trailed off, something raw flickering across his features. I saw that armor isn't the same as strength. That maybe what I've been teaching him is how to suffocate rather than how to survive. So what do you want me to do? Eleanor asked. Teach him balance. Lord Nightshade looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Teach him to feel without breaking. To show nothing to enemies while still remembering he's allowed to be whole with those he trusts. Teach him what I never learned, how to be both monster and man. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Lucian broke the silence. Father, are you afraid? Lord Nightshade didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely audible. Every moment of every night since your mother died. The vulnerability in those words nearly undid Eleanor. She saw Lord Nightshade not as the ancient, powerful creature he presented to the world, but as a father who'd lost his partner and was desperately, terrifyingly alone in trying to protect their child. Then let us help you, Eleanor said softly. His gaze snapped to her. Us? You can't do this alone anymore. Whatever's coming this assembly, these threats, you need allies. Even if one of them is just a mortal governess who doesn't understand your world. Especially because you don't understand, Lord Nightshade murmured. You see things we've stopped seeing. Question things we've stopped questioning. He paused. But there are dangers you need to understand if you're truly walking into this with us, then explain. Them, what followed was an education that left? Eleanor's head spinning. Lord Nightshade spoke of the 5 houses Nightshade. Ravencross, Silvermere, Thornwood, and Ashenfell, each with their territories, their powers, their ancient grudges. He explained blood oaths and binding magic. The way vampires were tied to their sworn lords through rituals that predated written language. He described the courts, the complex hierarchy of power where age and bloodline determined status. We don't turn mortals carelessly, he said, refilling his goblet from a crystal decanter that Eleanor tried very hard not to think about. The act of turning requires consent, given freely and fully informed. Without it, the transformation fails, the mortal dies screaming, and the vampire who attempted it faces execution. Why? Eleanor asked. Because forced bonds corrupt both parties. The turned mortal becomes a revenant, mad, violent, uncontrollable. The vampire loses a piece of their humanity with each failed turning, until they become the monsters humans fear in their darkest nightmares. Lucian had been listening intently, his half-eaten dinner forgotten. Is that what happened to Lady Ravencross? Everyone says she went mad. Lord Nightshade's expression darkened. Lady Ravencross attempted to build an army of turned mortals during the Wars of Succession. She didn't bother with consent. The results were catastrophic. Most of her victims died. Those who survived became something worse than death. She was contained, not destroyed, but her house has never forgiven the shame. And she's at this assembly? Eleanor's stomach turned. She is. Along with Lord Thornwood, who believes hybrids should be eliminated for the purity of the bloodline. And Lord Silvermere, who spent 2 centuries trying to expand his territory into mine. Lord Nightshade's smile was sharp. It should be a delightful gathering. Eleanor set down her fork, appetite gone. You're walking into a nest of enemies with a child they want dead or controlled. Yes. That's insane. That's necessary. Lord Nightshade's gaze hardened. If I don't present Lucian at the assembly, they'll assume I'm hiding him because he's weak. They'll challenge my right to name him heir. And if that happens, House Nightshade becomes vulnerable, our territories forfeit, our sworn vassals free to defect, our bloodline dissolved. So you sacrifice your son to protect your house? Eleanor's voice shook with barely contained anger. I sacrifice nothing. Lord Nightshade rose from his chair with liquid grace, moving to stand behind Lucian. His hand settled on the boy's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection that made Lucian freeze in surprised wonder. I prepare my son to face his enemies with strength and cunning. I arm him with the tools to survive a world that wants him erased. And I dare any vampire in those courts to touch what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. Miss Ashford, he continued, his gaze locking with hers. If you stay, if you truly commit to this path, you'll be bound to our house's fate. The other vampires will see you as Lucian's companion, possibly mine. That makes you a target. They'll test you, threaten you, try to use you against us. Let them try, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her own certainty. Lord Nightshade tilted his head, studying her. You sound almost eager. I sound tired of running. Eleanor stood, meeting his gaze across the table. I've spent months being afraid of shadows and whispers. I'm done hiding from people who want to break me. If your enemies come for Lucian, they'll find I'm not as defenseless as I look. Something blazed in Lord Nightshade's eyes, approval, admiration, something dangerously close to desire. Brave and foolish in equal measure. Isn't that what you need? He smiled then, truly smiled, and it transformed his face into something devastating. Perhaps it is. Lucian looked between them. His expression caught between hope and confusion. Does this mean Miss Ashford is staying? Really staying? Eleanor crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair. I'm staying. Whatever comes, we face it together. You, me, and your father. The boy threw his arms around her neck with the desperate trust of a child who'd been alone too long. Eleanor held him, feeling his small body tremble against hers. Over Lucian's head, her gaze met Lord Nightshade's. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite name, longing and fear, and something raw that looked almost like grief. Thank you. He mouthed silently. Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight for words. She'd come to Thornvale looking for shelter. She'd found something far more dangerous, a family worth fighting for, and a vampire lord whose walls were beginning to crack. The assembly was 3 months away, and Eleanor had no idea if any of them would survive it. Chapter 5, Shadows at the Gate. The attack came on a night when the moon hung heavy and red above Thornvale Manor. Eleanor had been reading to Lucian in the library, a collection of fairy tales that seemed darkly appropriate for a household of vampires. The boy was curled against her side on the velvet settee, his head resting on her shoulder, his breathing slow, and even as sleep crept over him. It had been 3 weeks since that first dinner, and he'd grown comfortable with her in ways that made her heart ache with protective tenderness. She was just closing the book when the windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor in a glittering spray. Eleanor threw herself over Lucian as shards rained down, feeling cuts open along her arms and back. The boy cried out, muffled against her shoulder. Through the broken windows came a figure dressed in black, moving with the inhuman speed Eleanor had learned to recognize. Not human. Vampire. He was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp angles and cold eyes, with hair the color of fresh snow. He landed in a crouch amid the glass, his gaze fixing on Lucien with unmistakable hunger. "The mongrel child," he said, his voice carrying an accent Eleanor couldn't place. "House Ravencross sends its regards." Eleanor's mind raced. The library was 3 floors up, too high to escape through the broken windows. The door was across the room, 20 feet that might as well have been 20 miles. Lord Nightshade was in his tower study, too far away to hear normal cries for help. "Get behind me," Eleanor whispered to Lucien, pushing the trembling boy toward the settee's far end. The vampire laughed. How sweet. The mortal pet thinks she can protect him. He moved forward with liquid grace. "Lord Ravencross wants the half-breed brought back alive. You, however, are expendable." Eleanor grabbed the only weapon within reach, the heavy brass candlestick from the side table. It felt absurdly inadequate against a creature that could move faster than her eyes could track. "Stay back," she said, hating how her voice shook. "Or what? You'll strike me." The vampire's smile was all teeth. "I've survived 3 centuries of war, mortal." "You're pathetic." Eleanor threw the candlestick directly at his face. Not to hurt him. She knew that was impossible. But to distract him long enough to scream with everything she had. "Caspian!" The vampire snarled, batting the candlestick aside. But in that half-second of distraction, Eleanor had grabbed the fireplace poker. The iron was old, heavy, blessed by some long-dead priest according to the inscription on the handle. The vampire lunged. Eleanor swung with desperate strength, catching him across the temple. The iron connected with a sound like sizzling meat, and the vampire actually screamed, stumbling backward with smoke rising from the wound. "Iron!" he hissed, his beautiful face contorting with rage and pain. "The bitch has iron!" Eleanor didn't waste breath on response. She positioned herself between the vampire and Lucien, the poker raised, her heart hammering so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. The vampire's eyes narrowed. "You can't hold me off forever." "The moment you tire." The library door exploded off its hinges. Lord Nightshade entered like a storm given form, dark and terrible and moving so fast Eleanor's mind couldn't process it. One moment he was at the doorway. The next he had the Ravencross vampire pinned against the wall by his throat, feet dangling a foot off the ground. "You dare!" Lord Nightshade's voice was barely recognizable, layered with something ancient and furious. "Enter my house, threaten my son, touch what is mine." The Ravencross vampire choked, clawing uselessly at the hand crushing his windpipe. Lord Ravencross commanded, "The mongrel must be evaluated." "The mongrels is my heir and under House Nightshade's protection." Lord Nightshade's eyes had gone completely black, no white, no iris, just endless darkness that seemed to swallow light. "You've violated sanctuary law. You've attacked a child under his own roof. The penalty is death. You can't. Covenant law requires trial. I am the law in my own territory." Lord Nightshade's grip tightened, and Eleanor heard bones crack. "And you've just given me justification for war." With a casual flick of his wrist, Lord Nightshade threw the vampire through the already shattered window. The scream that followed was cut short by a wet final sound from the courtyard below. Silence fell, broken only by Lucien's ragged breathing and Eleanor's hammering pulse. Lord Nightshade turned to them, and Eleanor flinched despite herself. He looked nothing like the controlled, cultured nobleman who'd taken dinner with them. His face was sharp, feral, inhuman. His eyes were still that bottomless black. When he moved toward them, it was with a predator's stalking grace. "Lucien." His voice was rough, barely controlled. "Are you hurt?" "And no, father. Miss Ashford protected me." Those black eyes shifted to Eleanor, and she forced herself not to retreat. She could see him fighting for control, see the monster and the man warring beneath his skin. "You're bleeding," he said quietly. Eleanor glanced down at her arms, seeing For the first time, the dozens of small cuts from the glass. Blood ran in thin rivulets down to her hands, dripping onto the floor. It's nothing. Just superficial. It's blood. Lord Nightshade's voice had gone dangerous, strained. Your blood. In my presence. After violence. When my control is already. He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard she heard teeth grind. You need to leave, now. Both of you. Father? Lucien's voice was small, frightened. Go! The word came out as a roar that shook the walls. Eleanor grabbed Lucien's hand and pulled him toward the door, but not before she saw Lord Nightshade collapse. Against the wall, his hands fisted in his hair, his whole body trembling with the effort of restraint. She'd forgotten in the weeks of careful dinners and gentle conversations what he truly was, a vampire, a predator. A creature whose control was a choice, not a guarantee. Mrs. Blackwood met them in the hallway, her face pale. The healer's quarters. Now, and for God's sake, girl, bandage those cuts before. A crash from the library made them all freeze. He's fighting it, Mrs. Blackwood whispered. Fighting the bloodlust. After violence, after so long without feeding properly. She grabbed Eleanor's arm with surprising strength. If he loses control, he'll drain you dry and hate himself for it afterward. Move. They ran out the healer, a stern woman named Agnes, who asked no questions, cleaned and bandaged Eleanor's wounds with practiced efficiency while Lucien sat in the corner, knees drawn to his chest, silent tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he kept whispering. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I didn't exist. Stop. Eleanor crossed to him once Agnes had finished, kneeling despite the sharp pull of bandaged skin. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. But they came for me. They'll keep coming. Father he had to become... Lucien's voice broke. I hate what I am. I hate that I make him into a monster. Your father is not a monster for protecting you. Eleanor cupped the boy's face gently. He's not a monster for being what he is. And you are not responsible for the cruelty of others. Miss Ashford is correct? They both turned to find Lord Nightshade in the doorway. He'd composed himself, his eyes were their normal storm gray again, his features arranged into careful control. But Eleanor could see the tension in every line of his body, the way he stayed carefully by the entrance, maintaining distance. Lucien, he said quietly. Go to your room. Mrs. Blackwood will stay with you tonight. But father, now please. The please seemed to cost him something. Lucien hesitated, then obeyed, casting one last worried glance at Eleanor before Mrs. Blackwood led him away, leaving Eleanor alone with the vampire lord, who just killed a man in front of her and then nearly lost control of his hunger. You should fear me, Lord Nightshade said into the silence. He still hadn't moved from the doorway. After what you witnessed, after what almost happened, you should be running. Should I? Eleanor stood slowly, testing her balance on shaky legs. Or should I be thanking you for saving our lives? I killed someone in front of you. You killed someone who was trying to kidnap your son. Eleanor took a step toward him. There's a difference. And when I looked at your blood? His voice dropped to barely audible. When every instinct I have screamed to feed, to take to, he stopped, his hands clenching. You saw what I became, Eleanor. The monster beneath the civilized mask. It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. I saw a father protecting his child, she said softly. I saw someone fighting their nature with everything they had because hurting us would destroy them. That's not a monster, Caspian. That's a man. He flinched as if she'd struck him. You don't understand what I am. What I'm capable of, then, explain it to me. Eleanor moved closer, closing the distance between them. Stop hiding behind walls and warnings. If we're truly in this together, if I'm truly bound to House Nightshade's fate, then I need to understand all of you. Not just the controlled lord who takes tea and discusses literature, the vampire who kills to protect what's his. The father who's terrified of failing his son. All of it. Lord Nightshade stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. You're asking me to show you my worst. I'm asking you to trust me the way you want Lucien to trust the world. To let someone see you and stay anyway. The vulnerability that flashed across his face was devastating. And if you leave? If you see what I truly am and realize you've made a terrible mistake? Eleanor reached out slowly, giving him every chance to retreat. When he didn't, she placed her hand over his heart, or where his heart would be, if it still beat. Then I'll leave. But I don't think I will. Why? The word was raw, desperate. Why would you stay with a creature who just killed a man, who nearly lost control, who represents everything you should flee from? Because, Eleanor said quietly, I spent 3 months running from monsters who wore human faces and called themselves gentlemen. And then I found a vampire who fights his nature to protect a child. And then I found a child. And then I found a vampire who fights his nature to protect a child who fights his nature to protect a child. Who admits his fears, who's trying so desperately to be good. She paused. You're more human than most humans I've known, Caspian, monster and all. His hand came up to cover hers, cool fingers trembling slightly. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? A laugh escaped him, shocked, genuine, almost helpless. Dangerous girl. What am I going to do with you? Teach me, Eleanor said. Teach me your world. Teach me how to survive the assembly. Teach me how to protect Lucien when you can't be there. That's asking to walk deeper into darkness. I'm already in the dark. You might as well light the way. Lord Nightshade studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with infinite care, he lifted her bandaged hand to his lips, not quite kissing it, but close enough that she felt his cool breath against her skin. Very well, he murmured. But understand this, Eleanor Ashford. Once you truly know what I am, there's no unknowing it. Once you're bound to this house, to me, to Lucien, there's no walking away unscathed. I stopped being unscathed the moment I walked through Thornvale's gates. His smile was sad, beautiful, and utterly resigned. Then welcome to the abyss. I hope you don't regret the fall. Outside, clouds covered the red moon, plunging Thornvale into deeper shadow. And in the forest beyond, more eyes watched and waited. House Ravencross had made its move. War was coming. And Eleanor had just chosen her side. Chapter 6. Blood and Secrets. Eleanor found Caspian in his tower 3 nights after the attack, standing before a wall she'd never noticed before. In the candlelight, she could see it was covered in names, hundreds of them. Written in languages both familiar and ancient, some carved into the stone itself. Others painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The remembrance wall, he said without turning. Every vampire I've killed. Every life I've taken in 347 years of existence. Eleanor's breath caught. The wall stretched from floor to ceiling, dense with names. All of them? All of them. Some were enemies. Some were threats. Some were simply in the wrong place when I lost control in my early years. His finger traced one name near the bottom. Recent. The letters still dark. Dmitri Volkov. House Ravencross. 3 nights ago. He was trying to kidnap Lucien. He was following orders. He was someone's son, brother, perhaps father. And I ended him without hesitation. Caspian finally turned to face her. This is what I am, Eleanor. A killer with centuries of blood on my hands. Eleanor moved closer, studying the wall. Near the top, almost too faded to read, was a cluster of names with dates from the 1300s. These are from when you were young, newly turned, wild, dangerous. His voice carried the weight of old shame. My sire believed in breaking new vampires through starvation and violence. Make them desperate enough, and they'll kill without question. Make them kill enough, and they forget they were ever human. But you remembered. Eventually. After too many names on this wall. Caspian moved to the window, his profile sharp against the night sky. I killed my sire in 1398. Spent the next century trying to build something different. House where vampires weren't monsters by necessity. Where we could exist with some measure of humanity intact. Is that even possible? Eleanor asked quietly. I used to think so. Then Catherine, Lucien's mother, showed me it might be. She was human, educated, working as an archivist in Paris. She discovered what I was when she found me feeding in an alley. Should have run screaming. Instead, she asked questions. Eleanor heard the ache in his voice. You loved her. I loved what she represented. Hope. The possibility that I could be something other than the sum of my kills. Caspian's hand pressed against the window glass. She agreed to turn. We married under human and vampire law. And when Lucien was born, I thought perhaps I'd been given a second chance. A way to create something good from centuries of darkness. Then she chose the sun. She lasted 5 years as one of us. Long enough to bear Lucien, to nurse him through infancy, to teach him his first words. Then the weight of immortality, the hunger, the things she'd done to survive, it broke something in her. His voice cracked. She left a letter. Said she loved us both, but she couldn't bear what she'd become. That every time she looked at Lucien, she saw what she condemned him to, a half-life, belonging nowhere, hunted by those who fear difference. Eleanor's throat tightened. She was wrong. Was she? Caspian turned, his eyes fierce with pain. Lucien is hunted. He is feared. And I've spent 8 years trying to armor him against a world that wants him erased. All while knowing I'm the reason he exists in danger at all. You're also the reason he exists at all, Eleanor countered. You gave him life. You protect him. You love him. Even if you're terrified to show it fully. Love isn't enough against what's coming. Caspian crossed to his desk, pulling out a sealed letter with a wax seal she didn't recognize. This arrived tonight. From Lord Ravencross himself. He's demanding I surrender Lucien for evaluation before the Assembly. Or he'll petition the courts to strip House Nightshade of its territories and declare Lucien forfeit to any house that can claim him. Eleanor's blood went cold. They can do that? If they can prove I'm an unfit guardian, yes. If they can convince enough houses that Lucien poses a threat to vampire society, yes. Caspian's fist clenched around the letter, crumpling it. Ravencross will argue that the attack 3 nights ago was a sanctioned inspection under Covenant law, and that my killing his envoy proves I'm unstable and dangerous. But he broke sanctuary law. His word against mine. And he has allies who want Lucien removed from succession. Caspian's jaw tightened. I need to prove Lucien is strong, controlled, capable of navigating vampire politics without becoming a liability. I need to present him at the Assembly as an asset, not a weakness to be exploited. Eleanor moved to stand before him. Then we have 10 weeks to prepare him. To teach him everything he needs to know. It's not enough time. Then we make it enough. Eleanor held his gaze. You said you wanted me to teach him balance. So let me. But I can't do it alone, Caspian. He needs to see you, truly see you, as more than a distant lord demanding perfection. He needs to know his father trusts him enough to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is death in the courts. And isolation is death to the soul. Eleanor reached out, her hand hovering near his. You've spent 3 centuries building walls. Maybe it's time to let someone inside them. Caspian stared at her offered hand as if it were a trap. If I let you in, if I show you everything I am, you'll see things that will give you nightmares. I already have nightmares. At least these will be for something that matters. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the loneliness beneath. Slowly, as if the gesture cost him everything, he took her hand. His skin was cool, smooth, and the moment their palms touched, Eleanor felt that same electric current she'd felt weeks ago. Like recognition. Like something in her blood knew something in his. Caspian felt it too. His eyes widened slightly. What is that? I don't know. Eleanor's pulse hammered. I felt it before, that first night, like my blood recognizes you somehow. That's not possible. You're human. There's no vampire ancestry in your line. I would have sensed it. But he didn't release her hand. Instead, his thumb traced her wrist, directly over her pulse point. Unless ... Unless what? There are stories. Old stories about bloodlines that carried magic before vampires existed. Witches, oracles, humans whose blood held power. Caspian's gaze fixed on where his fingers rested against her skin. Those bloodlines were thought extinct. Hunted out during the purges. But if one survived... You think I'm descended from them? I think your blood called to me the moment you entered Thornvale. I think there's a reason you could throw iron at a vampire without hesitation. A reason you stood between a predator and a child without breaking. His grip tightened fractionally. And I think that makes you far more dangerous to have near me than I realized. Dangerous how? Caspian's eyes met hers, and the hunger in them stole her breath. Because blood like yours, blood with power, it sings to vampires. It's intoxicating, addictive, stronger than any wine or drug. If the other houses sense what you are, they'll try to claim you. Use you. And I. He stopped, his jaw clenching. You what? Eleanor whispered. I want to protect you from them. But I'm not sure I can protect you from myself. His voice dropped to barely audible. 3 nights ago, when I saw your blood, it took everything I had not to taste it. To see if it was as extraordinary as I sensed. And the wanting terrified me more than any enemy I've ever faced. Eleanor should have been frightened. Should have pulled away, demanded answers, run from this creature who just admitted he wanted to drink from her. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. What if I wasn't afraid? She heard herself say. Caspian's eyes went wide. Eleanor, what if I understood the risk and chose it anyway? What if I trusted you not to harm me? Trust is a luxury neither of us can afford. But he didn't release her hand. If you knew what I've done, what I'm capable of, show me then. Eleanor's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. You want me to understand your world? Start by showing me the truth of what you are. All of it. For a long moment, Caspian simply stared at her. Then, with infinite care, he lifted her hand to his mouth. Not to kiss it. To rest his lips against her pulse point, where her blood sang beneath the skin. You feel that? He murmured against her wrist. How your heartbeat quickens. That's fear. Prey recognizing predator. Or attraction, Eleanor breathed. His eyes snapped to hers, dark with something dangerous. Don't what? Acknowledge that there's something between us beyond teacher and governess? Beyond lord and servant? There can't be. But his lips remained pressed to her skin, his breath cool against her overheated pulse. I failed Catherine. I watched her choose death over immortality with me. I won't condemn another woman to that fate. Then don't condemn me. Choose me. Eleanor's free hand came up to cup his face, feeling the sharp edge of his jaw. Not for immortality. Not forever. Just for now. For however long we have before the assembly. Before whatever's coming tears everything apart. You're asking me to be selfish. I'm asking you to be alive. Eleanor's thumb traced his lower lip, and she felt him shudder. You've spent centuries being stone. Maybe it's time to remember what it feels like to want something just for yourself. Caspian's control cracked. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back. His eyes had gone dark, not black like during bloodlust, but deep gray like storm clouds. If I start wanting you, Eleanor, I won't be able to stop. Good, she whispered. He kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined a vampire's kiss might be. There was no violence, no taking. Just devastating gentleness, his cool lips against hers. His hand cradling her head like she was something precious and breakable. He kissed her. The way drowning men breathed air, the way the lost found home. When he pulled back, his expression was raw. Dangerous girl. What have you done to me? The same thing you've done to me. Eleanor's fingers traced his lips, feeling them curve into something almost like a smile. Made me care when I swore I wouldn't. This complicates everything. I know. The other houses will see you as leverage, as weakness to exploit. Let them try. Caspian laughed, helpless, genuine, tinged with something that might have been joy. You're going to destroy me. Or save you. Eleanor stepped back, though it cost her. Now, are you going to teach me about vampire politics, or do I have to figure it out myself when the assembly tries to kill us all? His smile turned sharp, predatory, beautiful. Very well, but understand this. Once you know our secrets, there's no going back to ignorance. You'll be bound to House Nightshade in ways that transcend employment. I'm already bound, Eleanor said quietly. To Lucian. To you. To whatever this is becoming. Caspian studied her for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk, pulling out maps and documents. Then let's begin. The first lesson, trust no one at the assembly, not even those who smile. As they bent over the maps together, Eleanor felt the weight of what she'd chosen settling over her. She'd walked into the darkness, willingly, and she wasn't sure either of them would emerge unchanged. Chapter 7. The siege. The warnings came 3 days before the full assault. First, the servants began disappearing. The scullery maid who'd worked at Thornvale for 15 years simply didn't arrive for her shift. Then the stable master vanished overnight, his quarters emptied of personal belongings. By the third day, only Mrs. Blackwood, Agnes the healer, and 2 loyal footmen remained. They're being threatened, Mrs. Blackwood reported grimly over breakfast. House Ravencross is offering gold and protection to any who abandon Thornvale before the reckoning. Those who refuse are finding dead animals on their doorsteps. Warnings carved into their cottage doors. Caspian's expression remained controlled. But Eleanor had learned to read the tension in his shoulders. The way his fingers drummed once against the table before going still. They're trying to isolate us. Cut off our human support before they attack. Will they really attack the manor itself? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. They're testing boundaries. Seeing how far they can push before I respond with force. Caspian's gaze shifted to Lucian, who was pushing eggs around his plate with mechanical precision. Which is exactly what they want, justification to claim I'm unstable and dangerous. So we do nothing? Eleanor heard the frustration in her own voice. We prepare. Caspian stood, moving to the window overlooking the grounds. The manor's protections are old, built when vampire houses still warred openly. But they require blood to activate, specifically, the blood of House Nightshade's lord. Blood magic, Eleanor murmured, remembering their late-night lessons. Like the binding oaths. Stronger. The wards will prevent any vampire not sworn to House Nightshade from crossing the threshold without invitation. But once activated, they'll drain me. Make me vulnerable. His jaw tightened. Which is why I've waited. Once the wards are raised, I'll need time to recover. If they attack during that weakness, then we protect you while you're vulnerable, Eleanor said firmly. Lucian and I, Mrs. Blackwood, we'll hold them off until you're strong enough to fight. Caspian turned, something almost like fear flickering across his features. You're mortal. If they breach the manor, we're dead anyway. Eleanor stood, moving to his side. Stop trying to fight this alone, Caspian. Let us help. He looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, his hand found hers, cool fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. I'm not accustomed to relying on others. I know, learn. The moment shattered when Lucian's voice cut through the room, small and terrified. Father. The forest. They rushed to the window. The Blackwood forest that bordered Thornvale's grounds was burning. Not natural fire. This burned with unnatural colors. Green and violet flames that consumed the ancient trees without smoke. Magic fire. Vampire fire designed to destroy the natural barriers between territories. They're coming tonight, Caspian said quietly. Ravencross is forcing my hand. Either I activate the wards now and weaken myself, or I leave us defenseless when they attack. Then we activate them. Eleanor squeezed his hand. And we trust each other to survive what comes next. Caspian's eyes met hers, storm gray and infinitely deep. If I don't survive this, you will. If I don't, he continued firmly, there's a contingency. Papers in my study making you Lucian's legal guardian under both human and vampire law. Gold enough to get you both far from here. Contacts in Paris, Rome, Places where the house's reach is weaker. Eleanor's throat tightened. You're not going to die. But if I do, promise me you'll take him. Promise me you'll keep him safe, teach him to survive. Help him remember he's worth more than what the courts say he is. Caspian, promise me. Eleanor. She saw the desperation in his eyes. The father's fear beneath the Lord's control. I promise. But you're going to survive this because Lucien needs you. I need you. Something raw flashed across his face. Then, with witnesses be damned, he pulled her close and kissed her fierce and claiming and edged with goodbye. When he released her, his expression had shifted into something ancient and terrible. Mrs. Blackwood, take Lucien to the inner sanctuary. Seal the door from inside. Don't open it for anyone but Eleanor or myself. Father, no. Lucien rushed forward. I can fight. I'm strong enough. You're strong enough to survive. Caspian knelt, bringing himself eye level with his son. Which is what I need you to do. Survive tonight. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay hidden until it's safe. But you'll come back? Lucien's voice cracked. You promise you'll come back? Caspian pulled his son into an embrace rare, precious, devastating. I promise I'll fight like hell to come back to you. Mrs. Blackwood had to physically pull Lucien away. The boy reaching for his father even as they disappeared down the corridor toward the manor's heart. Leaving, Eleanor alone with Caspian in the fading afternoon light. You should go with them, Caspian said. But without conviction, and leave you to face this alone? Not a chance. Eleanor moved to the weapons cabinet Caspian had shown her weeks ago, pulling out a crossbow loaded with iron bolts. You taught me vampire weaknesses. Time to see if I learned anything. Eleanor, don't. She turned to face him. The crossbow held with confidence born of desperate practice. Don't try to protect me from this. Or past that. You want me bound to House Nightshade? Then let me fight for it. Caspian stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to her, cupping her face with both hands. You're the bravest, most foolish woman I've ever known. You've mentioned that before. I'm terrified of losing you. Then don't lose. Eleanor rose on her toes, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to his lips. Now activate those wards before I change my mind about being brave. The ritual took place in the manor's great hall, where the original stones of Thornville's foundation were exposed in a circle carved with symbols Eleanor couldn't read. Caspian knelt at the center, a ceremonial blade in his hand. Once I cut myself, the blood magic will take hold, he explained. It'll drain me fast, centuries of power channeled into protective wards. I'll be conscious but weak, unable to fight effectively for several hours. How long until they arrive? They'll attack at full dark. 2 hours, maybe 3. Caspian's hand trembled slightly around the blade, the first sign of fear she'd seen from him. If they breach the wards before I recover... they won't. Eleanor positioned herself at the hall's entrance, crossbow ready. Do it, Caspian. I'll watch your back. He smiled, sad, beautiful, resigned. Till death or dawn, brave girl. Till death or dawn. The blade cut across his palm, and blood welled up dark as wine. Caspian pressed his bleeding hand to the stone circle, and Eleanor felt the moment the magic caught a pulse that ran through the entire manor like a heartbeat, making the air shimmer with power. Caspian gasped, his body going rigid. The blood flowed from his hand in impossible quantities, spreading across the carved symbols in glowing crimson lines. His face went pale, paler than usual, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite vampires not being able to sweat. The magic was devouring him. Eleanor forced herself to stay at her post, watching the windows as darkness fell outside. She could hear sounds from the forest, howls, shrieks, things that had no place in the natural world. Behind her, Caspian's breathing grew labored. The wards flared to life with a sound like thunder, visible waves of crimson energy washing over the manor's exterior. Through the windows, Eleanor saw them, dozens of figures emerging from the burning forest. Moving with inhuman speed toward Thornville's grounds, they hit the wards and screamed. The first wave bounced back, thrown 20 feet by the magical barrier. But they came again and again, testing the ward's strength. Looking for weaknesses. How long? Eleanor called back to Caspian. The wards will hold as long as I'm alive. His voice was strained, barely recognizable. But if they find a way to kill me before I recover ... they won't. Eleanor's hands tightened on the crossbow. I won't let them. The attack on the wards intensified. Eleanor counted at least 30 vampires, far more than she'd expected. They moved in coordinated patterns, striking the barrier in rotating waves. Each impact making the crimson glow flicker slightly. Then she saw him. A vampire stood apart from the others, watching the assault with calculating eyes. He was beautiful in the way all old vampires were beautiful, ageless, perfect, inhuman. His hair was silver white, his skin pale as death. And he wore robes that marked him as nobility. Lord Ravencross himself. He met her gaze through the window, and smiled. Then he raised his hand. And the vampires attacking the wards fell back into formation. From the forest emerged something Eleanor had never seen before, a creature that was part vampire, part something else. It stood 12 feet tall, covered in matted fur, with fangs like daggers and eyes that glowed red. Caspian! Eleanor's voice shook. What is that? Revenant! Caspian gasped from behind her. Failed turning. Driven mad. Shouldn't be controlled ... unless ... Unless what? Unless Ravencross has been experimenting with blood magic. Binding revenants. To his will. The revenant charged the wards with a roar that shook the windows. It hit the barrier with the force of a battering ram, and this time, the crimson glow didn't just flicker, it cracked. Eleanor's blood went cold. The wards are breaking. Not breaking. Caspian's voice was barely a whisper now. But they won't hold against that. Not for long. The revenant struck again. Another crack appeared in the magical barrier. Spreading like fractured glass, Eleanor made a decision. She ran to Caspian, dropping to her knees beside where he knelt, still connected to the ward circle. His eyes were barely open, his skin cold as ice, his breathing so shallow she had to press her ear to his chest to hear it. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she grabbed the ceremonial blade and cut across her own palm. Eleanor. No, she pressed her bleeding hand to his, their blood mingling where it flowed into the ward circle. The effect was immediate, and catastrophic power exploded through the manor like lightning, so intense Eleanor screamed. Her blood, whatever strange magic it carried, ignited the wards with new strength. The crimson glow turned brilliant white, blindingly bright. And the revenant's next strike bounced off with enough force to send it flying backward into the forest. But the power was consuming her. Eleanor felt her strength draining away, pulled into the hungry magic of the wards. Her vision grayed at the edges. Her heartbeat slowed. She was dying, she realized distantly. Feeding the wards with her life force just as Caspian had. Strong arms wrapped around her. Caspian pulled her hand away from the circle, breaking the connection. The wards settled into a steady glow, still strong, still holding, but no longer devouring her. Foolish girl. Caspian's voice was rough with emotion. You could have died. So could you, Eleanor managed, her head spinning. Did it work? Through the window they watched the vampires retreat into the forest, driven back by the strengthened wards. Lord Ravencross stood at the tree line, staring at the manor with an expression Eleanor couldn't read. Then he smiled, bowed mockingly, and disappeared into the darkness. They're gone, Eleanor whispered. For now. Caspian held her close, his face pressed into her hair. But they'll be back. And now Ravencross knows what you are. What am I? Dangerous, Caspian murmured. To him. To me. To yourself. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. Your blood just amplified 3-century-old wards beyond anything I've achieved alone. That kind of power. Every vampire in the 5 houses will want to claim it. Claim you. Eleanor's hand still bled, dripping onto the stone floor. Caspian's gaze fixed on it with unmistakable hunger. Don't, he said, though whether to her or himself, she couldn't tell. Don't tempt me. Not now. Not when I'm this weak. Eleanor should have been frightened. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Would it help? If you fed? Eleanor, would it help you recover? Help you be strong enough to protect Lucien when they come back? His eyes had gone dark, pupils blown wide with hunger and need and something that looked like anguish. Yes, but I won't. I can't. If I taste your blood, if it's as powerful as I sense, I might not be able to stop. Then, we'll find another way. Eleanor tore a strip from her petticoat and bound her hand, hiding the bleeding wound from his sight. But we survived tonight, Caspian. Together. Together, he repeated. The words sounding like both prayer and curse from the sanctuary depths. They heard Lucien's voice calling out, frightened, desperate, needing to know his father still lived. Go, Eleanor said softly. He needs to see you. Needs to know you're safe. Caspian hesitated, torn between checking on his son and staying with Eleanor. Finally, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle, reverent, edged with desperation. This isn't over, he said. Ravencross won't stop. Not now that he's seen what you can do. I know. I can't protect you from all of them. You don't have to. Eleanor managed a weak smile. I'm learning to protect myself. You taught me, remember? He left, moving slowly, still weakened but healing. Eleanor watched him go, then looked down at her bandaged hand. Her blood had saved them tonight, but she had a terrible feeling it might also destroy them. Outside, in the darkness beyond the wards, Lord Ravencross stood watching the manor with calculating eyes. Fascinating, he murmured to his second in command. The girl has Oracle blood. I thought that line extinct. What do you want us to do, my lord? Ravencross smiled, cold and predatory. We wait. Let Nightshade believe he's won. Then, at the assembly, when his guard is down, his eyes glowed red in the darkness. We take everything. The girl, the boy, his house, his pride, and if he fights, then we'll finally have justification to end House Nightshade once and for all. The vampire lord turned and vanished into the forest, leaving only the scent of death and dark promises behind. The siege had only just begun.
Chapter 8. Fractures and Confessions. Eleanor woke to find Agnes changing the bandages on her hand.
The healer's weathered face drawn with concern. You've slept 2 days, Agnes said quietly. The blood magic took more from you than Lord Nightshade realized. You're lucky to be alive, girl. 2 days. Eleanor struggled to sit up, her head spinning. Lucien? Caspian? The boy's been keeping vigil outside your door when he's not in lessons. Won't eat properly. Won't sleep. Anna's expression softened. And his lordship ... well, he's been somewhat difficult. Difficult how? Blaming himself. Refusing to feed. Spending every night reinforcing the wards personally rather than letting the blood magic sustain them. Agnes finished tying off the bandage with practiced efficiency. He's weakening himself. Being stubborn and foolish, if you ask me. Eleanor threw off the covers despite Anna's protests. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand. Where is he? The tower. Where else? But Miss Ashford, you're not strong enough. I'm strong enough. Eleanor grabbed her dressing gown, wrapping it around her nightdress. Thank you, Agnes. She found Caspian exactly where Agnes said she would. But the sight of him stopped her cold. He stood before the window, shirtless. His pale skin marked with dark veins that spread from his palms up his arms, the physical manifestation of blood magic overuse. His shoulders were rigid with tension, and even from the doorway, Eleanor could see the tremor in his hands. You should be resting, he said without turning. So should you. Eleanor closed the door behind her, moving into the room. Agnes says you're killing yourself maintaining the wards manually. Better than risking your life again. His voice was flat, controlled. What you did was reckless. Foolish. You could have died, Eleanor. But I didn't. This time. He finally turned and Eleanor's breath caught. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken with exhaustion and hunger. The dark veins crawled up his neck like poisonous vines. The next time Ravencross attacks and he will attack, your blood magic won't be enough. It'll consume you completely. Then we find another way. There is no other way. The words exploded from him with rare violence. Don't you understand? Your blood is powerful. Yes, more powerful than anything I've encountered in 3 centuries. But that power comes with a price. Every time you use it, you're burning through your own life force. A few more times and there won't be anything left to burn. Eleanor moved closer despite the warning in his tone. And what about you? You're starving yourself, overextending your power, refusing to feed properly. How is that any different? Because I'm already dead. Caspian's laugh was bitter. I've been dead for 347 years. But you're alive, Eleanor. Warm and mortal and so achingly fragile. And I refuse to watch another woman. He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching. Another woman, you what? Eleanor's heart hammered. Care for, he finished quietly. I refuse to watch another woman I care for destroy herself because of what I am. The admission hung between them. Raw and honest. Catherine didn't destroy herself because of you, Eleanor said softly. She destroyed herself because she couldn't reconcile what she'd become. That's not the same thing, isn't it? She turned for me. Bore my child. Became a monster. She was never a monster. Eleanor reached out, her hand hovering near his marked arm. And neither are you. Stop punishing yourself for choices other people made. Caspian stared at her offered hand as if it were a trap. You should hate me. Fear me. Everything I touch turns to ash and blood. Then I'll burn. Eleanor closed the distance, pressing her palm against his chest where his heart no longer beat. I'm not Catherine Caspian. I'm not choosing immortality. I'm not running from what you are. I'm choosing this right now, right here, with full knowledge of the cost. The cost might be your life. Then that's my choice to make. Not yours. Eleanor's other hand came up to cup his face, feeling the sharp edge of his jaw. You've spent weeks teaching me about vampire politics, about how to protect Lucien, about your world. But you've never asked what I want from this. His eyes searched hers, dark with hunger and fear and desperate hope. What do you want? I want to stop pretending this is just about Lucien. I want to stop dancing around what's happening between us. Eleanor's thumb traced his lower lip, feeling it tremble beneath her touch. I want you to stop trying to protect me from yourself and trust that I know what I'm choosing. Eleanor, feed from me. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Caspian went absolutely still, his entire body rigid. No, you're starving. The blood magic is consuming you because you won't feed properly. And we both know human blood from your stores isn't enough anymore, not after what you've expended maintaining the wards. I won't take from you. His voice shook. I can't. If I taste your blood, that powerful, intoxicating blood, I might not be able to stop. I might drain you dry and hate myself for it afterward. Do you trust me? Eleanor asked quietly. With everything I am. Then trust that I trust you. Trust that you're strong enough to stop. That you're more than the hunger. Eleanor tilted her head, exposing the curve of her neck. Feed from me, Caspian. Let me help you. This is madness. This is trust. For a long moment, Caspian simply stared at her, trembling with the effort of restraint. Then, with aching slowness, his hand came up to cradle the back of her head. His thumb traced the pulse point at her throat, feeling her heartbeat quicken. If I hurt you, he whispered, his lips close to her skin. If I take too much, you won't. Eleanor's hands gripped his shoulders, anchoring them both. I know you won't. Brave, foolish girl. His breath was cool against her throat. What have you done to me? Loved you. Eleanor breathed, and felt him shudder against her. The bite. When it came, was nothing like she'd feared. There was no violence, no pain. Just pressure, then a sensation like falling into warm water, drowning in sensation that bordered on overwhelming. She felt his mouth against her throat, felt him drinking. And beneath the physical sensation was something deeper. Connection. Recognition, like their souls were speaking. A language older than words. Caspian's arms wrapped around her, holding her close as he fed. Eleanor felt her strength flowing into him. Felt the dark veins on his skin beginning to fade. Felt his body warming slightly as her blood gave him back something he'd been missing. But beneath it all was the hunger, ancient, terrible, barely controlled. She could feel how much he wanted to take more, to drink deeper, to consume everything she was. And she could feel the strength it took for him to resist. After what felt like both seconds and eternity, he pulled back. His lips were stained red with her blood, his eyes brilliant with power and something that looked like anguish. The dark veins had faded completely, and color had returned to his pale skin. "Enough," he rasped. "Any more wood?" His legs buckled. Eleanor caught him, or tried to. They both went down together, Eleanor's back hitting the carpet with Caspian collapsed half on top of her. He was heavier than she expected, solid despite his slender frame. "I'm sorry," he gasped, trying to push himself up. "Your blood, it's so strong, overwhelming. Stay still." Eleanor held him close, feeling his body trembling against hers. "You're recovering. Just breathe. Vampires don't breathe. Then pretend." A laugh escaped him, helpless, genuine, tinged with something like joy. He buried his face in her neck, careful of the bite wound he'd left. "You're going to ruin me completely." "Good." Eleanor's fingers threaded through his hair, holding him close. "You deserve to be ruined by something other than guilt and duty." They lay tangled together on the tower floor, neither willing to move. Eleanor could feel Caspian's body gradually warming. Could feel the tremors easing as her blood worked through his system, restoring what the blood magic had depleted. "I love you," he said suddenly, quietly, against her skin. "I've been trying not to. Trying to maintain distance. But I love you, Eleanor Ashford, and it terrifies me." Eleanor's heart swelled. "I love you too. Have for weeks, probably. Since you showed me the remembrance wall and let me see your guilt. We're doomed." But he said it with something like contentment. "Probably." Eleanor's hand traced the strong line of his spine. "The assembly is in 6 weeks. Ravencross wants me dead or controlled. The other houses will try to use us against each other. We're walking into a nightmare. Together, though. Together." Caspian finally pushed himself up, looking down at her with an expression so tender it stole her breath. "I should bandage your neck. The wound needs... Kiss me first." He did deep in claiming and tasting of her own blood on his tongue. It should have been disturbing. Instead, it felt like coming home. When they finally separated, Caspian helped her to her feet and tended the bite wound with gentle efficiency. Eleanor watched him work, seeing the way his hands had stopped shaking, how the gauntness had left his face. "Your blood did more than feed me," he said quietly. "I can feel it, your power, your life force, woven through mine now. We're bound, Eleanor. Not a full blood oath, but close. I can sense you now. Feel your heartbeat. Know when you're in danger. Is that a bad thing? It means I'll go insane if anything happens to you." His eyes met hers. "It means you're tied to House Nightshade in ways that transcend law or logic. The other vampires will smell my blood in your veins. They'll know you're claimed." "Claimed," Eleanor repeated. "That sounds possessive." "It is." Caspian's smile was wry. "Vampires are possessive creatures. Especially about those we..." He stopped, then seemed to decide to be honest. "Those we love." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Father?" Lucian's voice was small, worried. Agnes said Miss Ashford was awake. "Is she? Can I see her?" Caspian opened the door, and Lucian launched himself at Eleanor with the desperate strength of a child who'd been terrified. Eleanor caught him, holding him close despite her own weakness. "You scared me," Lucian whispered against her shoulder. "You wouldn't wake up. I thought you'd chosen the son like mother." Eleanor's heart broke. No, sweetheart. No, I'm here. I'm staying. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep, Lucian said with the terrible wisdom of a child who'd lost too much already. Then I promise this. I'll fight like hell to keep this promise. Is that better? Lucian pulled back, studying her face with those two old eyes. Then, quietly, you love father. It wasn't a question. Eleanor glanced at Caspian, who'd gone very still. I do, she admitted. And he loves you. I can tell. He looks at you the way he used to look at mother. Lucian's gaze shifted between them. Does that mean you'll stay? Even after the assembly? Even if it's dangerous? Especially if it's dangerous, Eleanor said firmly. Something that might have been hope flickered across Lucian's young face. Mother left because she couldn't bear what she'd become. But you're not becoming anything. You're choosing us knowing what we are. I am. That's braver than turning, I think. Lucian looked at his father. Don't you think, father? Caspian's expression was soft, unguarded. I think Miss Ashford is the bravest person I've ever known. Vampire or mortal? Miss Ashford, Lucian said thoughtfully. That seems too formal now. If you're going to stay, if you love father, can I call you Eleanor? Eleanor's throat tightened. You can call me whatever you'd like. Lucian considered for a moment. Then so quietly she almost missed it. Could I call you mother? The question hung in the air, fragile and full of yearning. Eleanor looked at Caspian, whose eyes had gone bright with emotion. He gave her the smallest nod, permission, or perhaps plea. I would be honored, Eleanor whispered. Pulling Lucian close again. The boy cried, then truly cried. Not the controlled tears he'd been taught to hide. Eleanor held him through it, stroking his dark hair, murmuring nonsense comfort the way her own mother had once comforted her. Over Lucian's head. Her eyes met Caspian's. They'd become a family without meaning to. Bound by blood and choice and desperate love, the assembly would come. Ravencross would try to destroy them. The other houses would test and threaten and scheme. But for this moment, in this tower, they were whole, and Eleanor had never felt more certain she'd made the right choice. Chapter 9. The Courts of Shadow. The journey to the assembly took 3 days by carriage. Traveling through territories Eleanor had only read about in the ancient texts. Caspian had shown her. They passed through House Silvermere's lands, silver birch forests where the trees seemed to whisper warnings to travelers. Then House Thornwood's domain, where the roads were lined with blackthorn and rowan, protective charms carved into every mile marker. Finally, they entered neutral ground, the ancient fortress of Ashenfell, where the 5 houses had gathered for centuries to conduct their politics. Eleanor pressed her face to the carriage window, watching the fortress emerge from the mist like something out of a nightmare. It was massive, built of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Towers stretched toward the sky like accusing fingers, and the walls were carved with symbols that made her eyes ache to look at them too long. Blood wards, Caspian explained from across the carriage. He sat with Lucian beside him, both dressed in formal house nightshade attire, black coats with silver threading, high collars, every inch the powerful nobles they were meant to be. Woven by the 5 houses together after the Wars of Succession. No vampire can use offensive magic within these walls. No blood can be shed without consequence. What kind of consequence? Eleanor asked. Death. His expression was grim. The wards themselves will drain the life from anyone who violates sanctuary. Vampire or mortal. Eleanor touched the high collar of her own gown, deep burgundy silk that Caspian had commissioned. Formal enough for court, but practical enough to move in. The seamstress had woven silver thread along the bodice and sleeves, a subtle declaration of House Nightshade's protection. Around her neck, hidden beneath the collar, was the bite mark Caspian had left. It had healed remarkably fast. Agnes said vampire bites always did when both parties were willing, but the scar remained. A silvery mark that branded her as claimed. Remember what we discussed, Caspian said quietly, his gaze intense. You're here as Lucian's companion and educator. Not my lover. Not someone with oracle blood. Just a mortal governess who's proven herself loyal to House Nightshade. And when they sense your blood in her? Lucian asked, revealing how much he'd absorbed from their lessons. Won't they know she's been fed from? They'll assume I fed in necessity during the siege. A practical choice, nothing more. Caspian's jaw tightened. What they cannot know is how powerful her blood is. Or that we formed ... attachments. Because attachments are weaknesses, Lucian recited dutifully. In the courts. Yes. Caspian's hand found Eleanor's across the carriage space, squeezing once before releasing. I hate this. Hate that I have to pretend you're nothing to me when you're... He stopped, glancing at Lucien. When she's everything, Lucien finished softly. It's all right, father. I understand. We protect each other by pretending to be stone. Just like you taught me. The sadness in his young voice broke Eleanor's heart. The carriage rolled through Ashenfell's gates, and Eleanor's first impression was of controlled chaos. Vampires filled the courtyard, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all beautiful and terrible in their formal attire. They moved with that distinctive and human grace, their voices carrying across the space with preternatural clarity, and they all turned to watch as House Nightshade's carriage arrived. Steady, Caspian murmured. Let them look. Let them assess. Show nothing. The footman opened the carriage door, and Caspian emerged first, every inch the ancient lord, his expression carved from ice. He moved with deliberate grace, letting the gathered vampires see his strength, his control. The way he carried 3 centuries of power like a second skin. Then he turned and offered his hand to Lucien. The boy emerged with remarkable composure, his small hand steady in his father's. But Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his other hand clenched at his side. He was 8 years old and facing down vampires who wanted him dead. Finally, Caspian helped Eleanor from the carriage. The moment her feet touched the cobblestones, she felt it, dozens of vampire gazes turning toward her, assessing, measuring. She heard whispers, caught fragments. ... mortal ... governess ... quotes ... from recently ... And underneath it all, a hunger that made her skin prickle with instinctive fear. Ignore them, Caspian said quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. You're under my protection. Anyone who touches you answers to me. They walked toward the fortress entrance, Caspian in front, Lucien beside him. They walked toward the fortress entrance, Caspian in front, Lucien beside him, Lucien beside him, Lucien beside him. Eleanor half a step behind in the position of a trusted retainer. Every step felt like moving through deep water, the weight of ancient gazes pressing down on her. Lord Nightshade. The voice was smooth, cultured, poisonous. How unexpected to see you here. I'd heard rumors your house had fallen to siege. Lord Ravencross stepped from the crowd, and Eleanor's blood went cold. He was exactly as she remembered from the siege, silver-white hair, ageless beauty, eyes like chips of ice. But here, surrounded by his own house members, he seemed even more dangerous. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Rumors of my demise are greatly exaggerated, Caspian replied coolly. As are rumors of your hospitality, it seems. Your envoy violated sanctuary law. The consequences were appropriate. Dimitri was overzealous. I've already expressed my regrets to the courts. Ravencross's smile was all teeth. But I see you brought the mongrel after all. How brave. Or foolish. Lucien flinched almost imperceptibly. Eleanor saw Caspian's hand tighten on his son's shoulder support and warning both. My son is heir to House Nightshade, Caspian said quietly, dangerously. His bloodline is ancient and powerful. Any who question it question me. Of course. Ravencross's gaze shifted to Eleanor and she felt pinned like a butterfly to card. And this must be the mortal who helped defend your manor. How ... Resourceful of you, Nightshade, to use your servants so effectively. The dismissal in his tone was deliberate. Eleanor forced herself to lower her eyes, playing the submissive servant even as fury burned in her chest. Miss Ashford has proven herself valuable, Caspian said neutrally. Now if you'll excuse us, we have chambers to settle. They moved past Ravencross. But Eleanor felt his gaze following them. Calculating and cold. The chambers assigned to House Nightshade were luxurious but isolated, clearly deliberate. They occupied the fortress's eastern wing, far from the central halls where most houses gathered. A subtle insult, but one that Caspian accepted without comment. Once the doors closed behind them, Lucien's composure crumbled. He sat heavily on the settee, his small body trembling. They hate me. I could feel it. Every vampire out there wants me gone. Not every vampire. Caspian knelt before his son. House Ashenfell remains neutral. Lord Thornwood's position softens if we prove your worth. And House Silvermere. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows. So we're alone except for the cowards and the undecided. Lucien's voice was bitter beyond his years. Eleanor crossed to him, sitting beside him and pulling him close. We're not alone. We have each other. That's more than most houses can claim. She's right. Caspian's hand covered both of theirs. They expect us to be weak, divided. We'll show them strength. Unity. That House Nightshade cannot be broken by politics or threats. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Blackwood entered, her face pale.
She traveled ahead with the household staff, preparing their chambers.
My lord, a summons. The courts require your presence in 1 hour for preliminary proceedings.
You're to present Lord Lucian for ... evaluation.
The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Already? Eleanor's heart raced. We just arrived. They want us off balance, Caspian said grimly.
Want to assess Lucian before we've had time to prepare properly.
He stood, his expression hardening into that ancient, terrible mask. Very well.
If they want a show, we'll give them one.
The next hour passed in controlled chaos.
Caspian drilled Lucian on protocol, on how to stand, speak, show respect without submission.
Eleanor helped him dress in formal robes that made him look painfully young and impossibly regal all at once. Remember, Caspian said as they prepared to leave. You are House Nightshade's heir. You bow to no one except the assembled courts. You answer questions with truth but not excess. And you never ever show fear.
What if they ask about Mother?
Lucian's voice was small. Then you tell them she was brave, beautiful, and died as was her choice.
Not with shame, but with pride that she gave you life.
Lucian nodded. But Eleanor could see the terror in his eyes. The court chamber was a vast circular room, lined with galleries where lesser vampires watched from the shadows. At the room's center sat 5 thrones, 1 for each house lord. 4 were occupied.
The 5th House Ashenfell's throne remained empty. Its occupant choosing neutrality over participation, Caspian walked forward with Lucian at his side,
and Eleanor followed, taking her place among the other mortal attendants along the wall. From here she could only watch, helpless. Lord Caspian Nightshade, Lord Ravencross's voice rang out. He sat in his throne like a king dispensing judgment. You've petitioned the courts to recognize your son, Lucian Nightshade, as legitimate heir to your house and territories.
The courts must now determine if this ... child
is worthy of such recognition. My son requires no determination, Caspian said coldly. He is my blood, born of sacred union, heir by right and law. Half-mortal blood, Lord Thornwood interjected. He was ancient beyond reckoning, his skin like parchment, his eyes pale as bone. Tainted blood. The covenant is clear on hybrids. The covenant forbids forced unions.
My marriage to Catherine was freely chosen by both parties.
Lucian's birth was sanctioned by blood oath and witnessed by House Ashenfell.
Caspian's voice carried absolute conviction.
He is legitimate in every way that matters. Then let the boy speak for himself. Lady Silvermere leaned forward, her ageless beauty somehow more terrifying than Ravencross's cold malice. Let us see what he's made of. All eyes turned to Lucian. The boy stood alone in the center of the chamber, small and vulnerable beneath the weight of ancient gazes. Eleanor could see him trembling, could see the fear threatening to overwhelm him. State your name, child, Ravencross commanded. Lucian's voice came out barely above a whisper. Lucian Nightshade,
son of Caspian Nightshade and Catherine Ashford.
Heir to... Louder, Ravencross snapped. If you cannot even project your voice, how can you expect to rule a house? Lucian flinched. His gaze found Eleanor's across the chamber, desperate. Drowning, and Eleanor made a choice. She stepped forward from her place. Along the wall, a breach of protocol that made the assembled vampires gasp. Forgive me, my lords, she said clearly. But perhaps the question isn't whether Lord Lucian can project his voice. Perhaps it's whether this court is worth speaking loudly for. Silence fell like a blade. Lord Ravencross's eyes fixed on her with deadly focus. The mortal speaks out of turn. Lord Nightshade, control your servant, or she face consequences. Miss Ashford, Caspian's voice was tight with warning. Return to your place. But Eleanor had spent too long being silent, being controlled, hiding from the judgment of those who thought they owned her. She'd fled London rather than submit. She'd stood between a vampire and a child rather than retreat. She'd fed a creature of nightmare her own blood rather than watch him starve out. She was done being afraid. I will not, Eleanor said quietly. Not when a child is being terrorized for the crime of existing. Not when you claim to be dispensing justice while really, you're just displaying your fear. Fear? Thornwood's voice cracked like ice. You dare accuse this court. You're afraid of what Lucian represents.
Afraid that hybrid bloodlines might be stronger than pure ones. Afraid that the future looks different than the past and you can't control it.
Eleanor's voice rang through the chamber. So you bully a child, hoping to break him before he has a chance to prove you wrong. Enough! Ravencross rose from his throne. Lord Nightshade, if you cannot control your mortal, the courts will touch her, Caspian said quietly.
And I will burn this fortress to ash with everyone in it. The threat hung in the air. Absolute and terrible. And in the center of the chamber, Lucien stood taller, his tears drying. His voice suddenly clear and strong. My name is Lucien Nightshade. I am heir to House Nightshade. And I will not be broken by cowards who hide their weakness behind ancient laws. For a moment, no one moved, then Lady Silvermere began to laugh genuine. Delighted laughter that echoed through the chamber. The boy has spirit, she said. And his mortal champion has fire.
Perhaps Ravencross, your fears are justified after all. The game,
Eleanor realized with sudden, terrifying clarity,
had only just begun. Chapter 10. Dawn after darkness, the chaos that followed.
Eleanor's outburst happened in heartbeats. Lord Ravencross moved with inhuman speed, crossing the chamber floor toward Eleanor with murder in his eyes.
But Caspian was faster, appearing between them in a blur of motion. His hand locked around Ravencross's throat before the older vampire could reach her.
I warned you,
Caspian said quietly.
And the temperature in the chamber plummeted.
You violate sanctuary.
Ravencross choked out. The wards, I've drawn no blood, merely prevented you from harming what's mine.
Caspian's grip tightened fractionally. The wards permit self-defense.
Or have you forgotten the laws you claim to uphold? The other court members had risen from their thrones, the chamber erupting into shouted accusations and threats. Through it all, Eleanor saw Lucien standing frozen in the center, his young face caught between terror and awe as he watched his father defend them.
Enough! The voice came from the empty throne house Ashenfell's seat. A figure emerged from the shadows behind it, and Eleanor's breath caught.
She was ancient beyond measure, her skin translucent as spider silk,
her eyes holding depths that suggested she'd witnessed the birth of vampire kind itself, Lady Ashenfell.
The neutral house, the arbiter who rarely intervened. Caspian immediately released Ravencross and stepped back,
bowing deeply. Every vampire in the chamber followed suit, even the proud lords on their thrones. This court has devolved into chaos, Lady Ashenfell said, her voice papery but carrying absolute authority.
Lord Ravencross, you attempted violence against a mortal under another house's protection.
Lord Nightshade, you brought a mortal with oracle blood into these halls without declaration.
Both violations merit consequence.
Eleanor's heart sank. Oracle blood.
They knew.
However,
Lady Ashenfell continued, her ancient gaze sweeping the chamber.
This court was convened to evaluate young Lucien Nightshade,
not to settle grudges or display dominance. The boy has shown courage. His father has shown fierce protection. And the mortal, she turned her gaze to Eleanor.
The mortal has shown more spine than most vampires present. Lucien found his voice, small but clear. Please don't punish them for defending me.
I'm the one who's wrong. I'm the hybrid. I'm the problem.
Let them go. And I'll submit to whatever evaluation you require.
The offer broke Eleanor's heart. This brave, beautiful child, offering himself to save them. No.
Eleanor stepped forward despite Caspian's warning growl. Lady Ashenfell, if there must be consequences, let them fall on me.
I'm the one who spoke out of turn. I'm the one with oracle blood that wasn't declared. Lucien is innocent. He deserves... What he deserves, Lady Ashenfell interrupted,
is what every child deserves. Safety. Love. A chance to grow into whatever he's meant to become. Her gaze shifted to the assembled courts.
This assembly has forgotten its purpose. We were meant to maintain balance, not to crush difference.
To protect our kind, not to devour our own young because they don't fit narrow definitions of purity. The Covenant, Lord Thornwood began. The Covenant was written by vampires who'd just emerged from war, desperate to prevent another. It was meant to provide structure, not to become a weapon against children. Lady Ashenfell's voice carried centuries of weariness. I have watched 5 generations of this assembly.
I have seen us grow more fearful, more rigid, more concerned with maintaining the past than building a future. Perhaps that is why our numbers dwindle. Why fewer vampires choose to turn mortals. Why we're slowly fading into obsolescence.
The silence that followed was profound. Lady Ashenfell, Ravencross said carefully. Are you suggesting we ignore the Covenant's clear prohibitions? I'm suggesting the Covenant requires interpretation, not blind adherence. Lady Ashenfell moved with surprising grace for one so ancient,
descending from her throne to stand before Lucien.
The boy stood his ground, though Eleanor could see him trembling. Child, Lady Ashenfell said softly, do you know what you are? A mistake, Lucian whispered.
An abomination. Wrong. You are the future.
Lady Ashenfell placed one translucent hand on his dark hair. Hybrid bloodlines carry strengths neither pure vampire nor pure human possess.
Daylight tolerance. Emotional depth. The ability to exist in both worlds. You terrify these old vampires because you represent change they cannot control.
She turned to address the assembly.
I propose a new interpretation of the covenant. Hybrid children born of freely chosen unions shall be recognized as legitimate heirs, provided they can demonstrate control over their powers and understanding of our laws.
Lucian Nightshade has shown courage and restraint beyond his years. I vote to recognize his claim. House Ashenfell breaks centuries of neutrality for this?
Ravencross's voice was tight with barely controlled rage.
House Ashenfell breaks neutrality because continuing down this path leads only to extinction. Lady Ashenfell's gaze was ancient and implacable.
Lady Silvermere, what say you?
The beautiful vampire lord considered for a long moment. Then she smiled, sharp and calculating.
House Silvermere recognizes potential when it sees it. I vote to recognize the boy's claim. With ... conditions.
What conditions? Caspian's voice was dangerous. That House Nightshade shares research on hybrid development. That young Lucian be monitored, not controlled, monitored to ensure he develops safely.
And that the Oracle girl...
Lady Silvermere's gaze fixed on Eleanor.
That she be offered protection under joint house accord. Such rare bloodlines shouldn't be left vulnerable to
opportunistic claiming. It was a trap wrapped in protection, Eleanor realized.
Accept and she'd be bound to multiple houses, unable to remain solely with Caspian. Refuse and she'd be fair game for any vampire who wanted her power. I have a counter-proposal, Eleanor heard herself say. Every eye turned to her. Recognize me as formally bound to House Nightshade through blood oath. Grant me protected status not as a vulnerable mortal,
but as a sworn member of Caspian's house. Then your monitoring and research can proceed through proper, diplomatic channels rather than coercion. Caspian's head whipped toward her.
Eleanor, a blood oath is permanent. It would bind you. To your house. To you.
To Lucian.
Forever or until death.
Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Yes, I know. That's what I'm choosing. You would give up mortality? Lady Silvermere sounded intrigued.
Bind yourself to our politics, our wars, our endless games?
I would give up running. Give up hiding.
Give up pretending I'm not already bound to them in every way that matters.
Eleanor moved to stand beside Caspian and Lucian, creating a united front.
I choose House Nightshade. Freely. Completely. Let that be recorded in whatever ancient books you keep. The chamber erupted in whispers.
This is unprecedented, Lord Thornwood protested.
A mortal choosing to oathbind without turning is permitted under covenant law.
Lady Ashenfell interrupted smoothly.
Rare but legal. Very well. Do you accept your oath, Lord Nightshade? Caspian stared at Eleanor with an expression
she couldn't quite name. Terror and hope and desperate love all warring beneath his controlled exterior.
You understand what you're offering? A blood oath means your life force becomes tied to House Nightshade's fate. If my house falls, you fall with it.
If I'm destroyed, you'll feel it like losing part of yourself. You'll be bound to me until one of us dies.
I know, Eleanor said quietly. I'm asking you to choose me back. To bind yourself to a mortal who might only give you decades instead of centuries. To risk your heart again when the last time nearly destroyed you.
His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness.
Brave, foolish girl.
You're going to ruin me. Is that a yes?
It's a forever yes. Caspian turned to the assembly.
House Nightshade accepts Eleanor Ashford's oath.
We will bind her blood to ours before this court as witness.
The ceremony was ancient, simple, and absolute. Caspian cut his palm with the same ceremonial blade he'd used for the manor wards.
Then Eleanor's. They clasped hands, letting their blood mingle as Caspian spoke words in a language that predated modern tongues, words of binding, protection, eternal connection. Eleanor felt the moment the oath took hold, a rush of sensation like lightning through her veins.
Like suddenly being able to hear Caspian's thoughts at the edges of her consciousness.
She felt his love, his fear, his absolute devotion. Felt the strength of 3 centuries of existence flowing into her. Anchoring her dot and beneath it all, she felt Lucian, the third point in their triangle. The child who'd brought them together, who needed them both.
It's done, Lady Ashenfell pronounced.
Eleanor Ashford is now Eleanor Nightshade, oath bound to House Nightshade with all rights and protections thereof. Any who harm her will answer to Lord Nightshade as if she were his own blood.
Lord Ravencross looked like he wanted to protest.
But even he couldn't argue with an oath freely given and witnessed by the courts.
This assembly is concluded, Lady Ashenfell declared. Young Lucian is recognized as legitimate heir to House Nightshade.
The matter is settled. The courts will reconvene in 1 century to evaluate how hybrid bloodlines develop. Until then, leave the boy to grow in peace.
The dismissal was absolute. The gathered vampires began to disperse, some grudgingly.
Others with calculating looks that suggested this wasn't truly over. But for now, they'd won. Caspian pulled Eleanor close, his forehead resting against hers.
You bound yourself to me.
To us, forever. Was there ever really another choice?
Eleanor's hand found Lucian's, pulling the boy into their embrace.
You're my family.
Both of you.
I'm not losing that because some ancient vampires are afraid of change.
Lucian was crying happy tears this time, messy and uncontrolled.
Does this mean Eleanor is really my mother now? Officially?
By blood oath and court recognition, Caspian confirmed, his own voice rough with emotion. She's family, permanently.
Good,
Lucian said fiercely.
Because I'm not letting her go. Ever.
They stood together in the center of the court chamber. Vampire Lord, mortal woman, hybrid child, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest.
This was home. Not a place, but these people. This fierce, broken, beautiful family they'd built from trauma and trust. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Caspian's smile was equal parts tender and predatory. Now we go home to Thornvale. We teach Lucian how to be both human and vampire. We prepare for whatever schemes the other houses are plotting.
And we live, Eleanor.
We actually live. We actually live.
Instead of just surviving.
Together, Lucian added.
Together, Eleanor agreed. They left Ashenfell as the sun was rising, Caspian and Lucian, protected by the carriage's shuttered windows.
Eleanor watching the dawn paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The fortress grew smaller behind them, and with it, the weight of the court's expectations. You're smiling, Caspian observed from the shadows.
I'm happy, Eleanor admitted.
Is that allowed?
For you?
Always. His hand found hers in the darkness.
You gave up a normal life for this.
For us, I gave up running for a home. I gave up hiding for a family.
That's not a sacrifice, Caspian.
That's choosing to live.
Eleanor squeezed his cool fingers.
Besides, what's normal about any of this?
His laugh was warm, genuine.
Fair point.
Lucian had fallen asleep against his father's side, exhausted from the trials.
Caspian stroked the boy's dark hair absently, his expression soft in a way Eleanor suspected few vampires ever witnessed.
Thank you, he said quietly.
For saving him.
For staying.
For choosing us when you could have run a dozen times over.
Thank you for letting me see you, Eleanor replied.
For trusting me with your wounds. For showing me that monsters and men aren't always separate things. What are we then?
Eleanor considered the question, this beautiful vampire who'd killed to protect his son, who'd fed from her veins. Who'd bound himself to her forever despite knowing she was mortal and temporary and so achingly fragile. We're human, she said finally. In all the ways that matter.
We love, we fear. We fight for what's ours. We're just human, trying to survive in a world that wants to break us.
Then I'm proud to be human with you,
Caspian murmured. The carriage rolled on through the morning,
carrying them home to Thornvale Manor,
where Mrs. Blackwood would have breakfast waiting and Agnes would scold them for taking risks and the roses would be blooming wild in their abandoned garden. They'd won their battle at the assembly, but Eleanor knew the war wasn't over.
Lord Ravencross wouldn't forgive this defeat.
The other houses would watch, waiting for weakness. And the mystery of her oracle blood remained unsolved.
A power she didn't fully understand that would continue to draw attention. But they'd face it together.
Lord, governess and heir. Vampire, mortal and hybrid. A family built on choice rather than blood, on trust rather than obligation. Eleanor rested her head against the carriage wall. Feeling the blood oath thrumming gently in her veins, Caspian's presence, a constant warmth at the edge of her consciousness.
She'd come to Thornvale fleeing scandal, looking for nothing more than survival and a paycheck. Instead, she'd found love.
Found purpose.
Found a home worth fighting for and a family worth dying to protect. The sun climbed higher.
And in the shuttered darkness of the carriage? Eleanor Nightshade smiled. She'd chosen the darkness willingly, and discovered it was full of light after all.